Hello, this is Realtor Katie. How can I help you?
Hi, I'm in the market for my first home.
Great, and what are you looking for?
Nothing crazy, just a 3-bed, 2-bath with a decent yard.
Okay, so what's your target budget?
I was hoping for $250,000. Most I can do is $300,000, but that's a real stretch.
Okay, let me see what I can find. Okay, we have one house that fits your criteria. Let me send that right over to you.
What?
Something wrong?
Well, I can't live here. It looks like the home was burned down.
And?
There's no ceiling or anything.
Right, well this is unfortunately the most I can do for you with the price range you've given me. You know how the market is these days. Your only options are to either increase your budget or hold out for a housing crash, and who knows if that'll even happen.
2 years ago, I bought my first home in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, at the age of 22. I bought at a time when house prices were far cheaper than where they're at now, and when mortgage rates were practically at all-time lows. It's fair to say that I got extremely lucky, and it crossed my mind recently that if I had instead waited until now in 2023 to buy my first home, there would have been no way I would have been able to afford it. It's crazy. I bought my house in 2021 for $285,000, and I had a housing payment at the time of $1,750 per month. Now guess how much it would have cost me if I were to have bought my house today? Close to $350,000, and I would have a housing payment of not $2,000, not $2,500, but $3,000 per month. And you know what? Even if I had the money to afford to buy a house in today's market, I would honestly be a little hesitant to pull the trigger since the outlook of the real estate market in 2023 isn't looking too great for us. I feel like we're all in this similar boat of trying to figure out whether buying a house in 2023 is a good idea, or whether we should just hold out until 2024 in the hopes that the real estate market improves. It's incredibly important to understand exactly how unaffordable houses are to buy right now compared to previous times. That way, we can know exactly how bad things are for us as home buyers right now, if that makes sense. Taking a look at what housing affordability looks like from a historical perspective, we can break it down into 3 components: house prices, mortgage interest rates, and median family income. As of the most recent data published by the National Association of Realtors, the median sales price of homes in the US is now on the decline. The report shows that home values peaked in the middle of 2022 at a median price of $420,900, and since then, homes have been declining in value every month. As of the last month available in the report, November 2022, the median home price is $376,700. This means that from June 2022 to November 2022, home prices are already down over 10%. We're going to have to wait a few months for the data to catch up to see if this trend has continued into 2023. However, I want to emphasize that just because home values are down somewhat compared to what they were a few months ago, doesn't necessarily mean that buying a home is a good idea right now. Home values historically are still very expensive. In reality, what's happened is that the housing market has essentially gone from being the most expensive it has ever been in history in the middle of 2022 to becoming a little less expensive now, but still overall very expensive historically. Moving on to the second component of housing affordability, mortgage interest rates. A mortgage interest rate is the cost of borrowing money to buy your house, and it has a huge impact on how much your monthly housing payment is. The higher the rate, the more your mortgage is going to cost each month. If we take a look at the last 50 years, mortgage rates today are technically relatively low. However, if we take a look at just the last 10 years, mortgage rates are comparatively high. This right here is when mortgage rates were at all-time lows, and this is when I lucked out and secured an insanely low 2.75% interest rate on my house. But since 2021, mortgage rates have more than doubled and are now hovering around the 6 to 7% level, making financing a home purchase very difficult and unaffordable. The last component of housing affordability is median family income, and median family incomes have been steadily increasing over the last year and are at the highest level in history. When we combine these 3 components, we can determine housing affordability, since housing affordability is essentially a measure of how much of our income is devoted towards our housing payment each year. According to the National Association of Realtors, housing affordability is practically the lowest it's been. That is, since 2006, which is right before the housing market collapsed. This means that despite home prices coming down over 10% since mid-2022, buying a home is surprisingly still more unaffordable than it was back then, because mortgage interest rates have increased at the same time home values have decreased. So to make sense of all of this, the data is telling us that buying a home now in 2023 is technically the worst time in the last 15 years to buy a house in terms of affordability. But don't let these stats drive you completely away from trying to buy a house. You might already be thinking, well, if now is the worst time to buy a house in the last 15 years, then I'm definitely not going to purchase a house this year. Well, don't count out buying a home just yet, because many experts have shared their opinion on where the housing market is and where it is headed. and they have some pretty interesting insights that might just change your mind. Of course, remember that no one can predict with absolute certainty what will play out for the housing market this year, but it's worth at least seeing what the experts have to say, even though they could very well be wrong. As far as what is in store for mortgage rates in 2023, Nadia Evangelo, senior economist and director of real estate research for the National Association of Realtors, sees 3 different potential rate scenarios occurring in 2023. In scenario 1, inflation continues to remain high, forcing the Fed to raise interest rates repeatedly. That means mortgage rates will keep climbing, possibly near 8.5%. In scenario 2, the consumer price index responds more to the Fed's rate hikes, and there's a gradual deceleration of inflation, causing mortgage rates to stabilize near 7% to 7.5% for 2023. In scenario 3, the Fed raises rates repeatedly to curb inflation and the economy falls into a recession. This could cause rates to likely drop to 5%. So that's what the director of real estate research at the NAR is predicting for mortgage rates this year. But what about house prices? When it comes to what will happen to home prices this year, most experts are expecting to see a small decline in values around 5 to 10%, but nothing major. Rick Sharga, an expert in real estate research, expects to see about a 5% drop nationally, and he even expects some markets to see prices continue to increase. So to sum up what the experts have to say, it's likely that home values could continue to experience a decline in 2023. But because of potential interest rate hikes, this doesn't mean that homes will necessarily become more affordable. So according to the experts, there is a fair chance that you could buy real estate at cheaper prices later this year, but don't expect your monthly housing payment to be much lower. The impact of lower home prices and higher mortgage rates in 2023 could essentially cancel each other out, making buying a home right now just as unaffordable as buying a year from now in 2024. Honestly, there are just so many scenarios that could play out, and not even economic super geniuses, no, not even the ones on Reddit, can predict with certainty things like what inflation will be or what the Fed will choose to do with interest rates this year. I hate to say it, but trying to predict what might happen a year from now is honestly not the best home buying strategy. And if you're sitting on the sidelines right now, desperately hoping that lower prices will come, there is a chance that you may end up disappointed. So if you're considering buying a home this year, then here's some advice that will at least minimize the chance of you making a bad decision. First, you have to make sure you plan on living in your home for at least 5 to 7 years. There's 2 reasons for this. One, if the housing market does continue to decline this year, house prices have historically always recovered. Even after the 2008 housing crisis, where home values saw an average decline of 33%, they still recovered after some time and are now far more expensive than they were at the peak of the housing bubble in 2006. So by living in your home for 5 to 7 years at the minimum, even if the housing market crashes, if you don't sell your home, you won't lose any money in the long term as the price of your home would recover. Reason number 2 to live in your home for a long time is because buying and selling real estate is expensive. When you buy a home, you have to pay expensive loan fees, and then you have to pay even more expensive selling commissions when you sell a home. So in order to make buying a home worth it, you need to spread out these transactions costs over a long period of time. If you only plan on living in a house for a few years, then it usually makes more financial sense to rent instead of own. Another piece of advice I have for you is if you are debating buying a home this year, be sure to budget conservatively. If it's a stretch financially to purchase your home this year, you should probably hold off because it is a risky and uncertain time to buy. For example, if you're a couple that makes a dual income and you're trying to buy your first home, be sure that you can afford living in your home on just a single salary. Don't buy a home banking on both of you working forever in order to simply pay your monthly housing payments. This is something my husband and I made sure we budgeted for. We could have bought a more expensive, bigger house if we had accounted for both of our salaries, but instead we decided to go for a cheaper home so that we could ensure that we would be able to make our payments on just a single source of income. Another important budgeting mistake people tend to make is not budgeting their housing payment accurately. There's so many costs that go into your overall housing payment that many people just don't account for. In addition to your mortgage cost, you need to account for property taxes, homeowners insurance, potential HOA fees, repair and maintenance costs, and utilities. It's surprising how quick these expenses can add up. My monthly mortgage cost is only $1,050, but after adding in all the other expenses, I pay over $2,000 per month on average for my home, which is around double the cost of my mortgage. Part of the reason for this is because property taxes in Texas are just the worst. But regardless, you need to make sure you budget accurately so that you don't resent the house you live in because it's draining all of your savings. If you plan on living in your home long term and you budget appropriately, then in the event that we do experience a recession or a real estate downturn, I'm confident you will be okay financially. And if you don't plan on buying a home this year and you have some spare cash, then you need to watch this video on how you can take advantage and get rich from the 2023 recession.